Good morning, Ms. Molefe.
Good morning, Chair.
Everybody.
Good morning, Chair.
Thank you. Are you ready?
Yes, Chair, we are ready.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The next witness that we will be calling is Ms. Mathane Makgato, who will give evidence on matters relative to her tenure as the head of Treasury in the years 2013 and 14. We had previously provided you, Chair, with the bundle marked BB10. However, we have also introduced a supplementary with which we seek to refer to in evidence with your leave, Chair. And so what was initially marked BB10 is now marked BB10A, and the supplementary bundle is marked BB10B.
Okay, thank you. Well, you said what was previously marked Exhibit BB10 is now marked Exhibit BB10A.
Yes, Chair.
The previous marking is not on record.
No,
It's
it is
your
not,
own
Chair.
internal.
It's our own internal,
Yeah.
Chair.
The lever arch file containing the affidavit of Ms. Mathane Makgato will be marked Exhibit 10, Exhibit BB10A, and the lever arch file containing her supplementary affidavit will be marked Exhibit BB10B.
Thank you, Chair. May the witness please be sworn in.
Yeah. So this is a Transnet witness. You remember yesterday we had witnesses relating to SABC. This is a Transnet witness.
Yes, Chair, this witness
So
speaks
we
to
are
Transnet
moving
matters.
back to Transnet.
Indeed so,
It's
Chair.
important to place that on record so that those reading the transcript know that we have moved from one work stream to another.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Please state your full names for the record.
Mathane Makgato.
Do you have any objections to taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear that all the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Makgato, please refer to the bundle before you that is marked BB10A. And can you turn to page 1 of that bundle? On page 1 to 35 of that bundle, is that your statement to the Commission?
Correct.
Can you please move the mic a bit closer to you so that you're audible?
Correct, Chair.
And on page 35 of that bundle, is that your signature?
Correct, Chair.
And the date that appears on that page, the date of the 16th of May 2019, is that the date on which you signed the statement?
It is so, Chair.
Can you also then refer to the bundle marked BB10B? From page 1 to 3 of that bundle, is that your supplementary affidavit?
Correct,
Your
Chair.
supplementary statement, rather.
It's correct, Chair.
On page 3 of that statement, is that your signature that appears there?
It is so, Chair.
And the date of the 6th of June 2019, is that the date on which you signed that statement?
It is correct.
Do you confirm the correctness of the statement?
I do confirm the correctness of the statement, Chair.
And insofar as your statement in BB10A, from page 1 to 35, do you confirm the correctness of that statement?
I do so, Chair.
Thank you. Can we then return to the bundle marked BB10A?
You'll have to raise your voice a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Please turn to page 1 of the bundle. Please tell the Chair what qualifications you hold.
I studied at the University of Fort Hare. I did my BCom majoring in economics, accounting and business economics. I then did an honors in economics at the said university. I followed that with
Hang
a
on
master.
1 second. I just want to check whether everybody can hear you at the back. I think you'll have to raise your voice. There are some who can't hear you.
Okay.
And bring your mic a little closer. Yeah, that should be fine. Just raise your voice.
Thank you, Chair.
Just start afresh where you got your BCom.
I studied and completed my BCom at the University of Fort Hare, majoring in accounting, economics, and business economics. I then went on to study and completed my BCom honors in economics at the same university. Later on, I studied my master's in development finance at the University of Stellenbosch. I then did, over a period of 25 years or so, I then completed the following courses that are relevant to my career. The first one is the Global Executive Development Program, which I did through the GIBS, that is the University of Pretoria Business School. This was a Transnet, or is a Transnet specific executive development program. I then went, I did financial engineering. This is a course that covers your typical financial market stuff, which is like interest rate, option pricing, futures, risk management, and I did this in 2001 at the University of California at their Berkeley campus. I then studied and completed a course at the University of Harvard at Boston, USA, in macroeconomic policy management. And I did a 3-month course called Economic Policy Formulation at the Klingendahl Institute at The Hague, the Netherlands.
And what is your employment history?
I started off in 1994 as a researcher at the National Institute of Economic Policy. During that period, I was privileged to be involved in a number of research projects, including the impact of foreign direct investment on employment, consumption, and I was also privileged to be part of the team that did the quantification of the RDP at that time. It was around 1994, 1995, at the beginning of our democracy. I spent about 4 years at the Institute. I then moved on to National Treasury, wherein I was employed as a Deputy Director in International Finance. It was in the Assets and Liability Management Division. It is during that time, from 1998, that I started being exposed and learning and growing in the financial market space. My duties included issuing bonds in the international markets, and during that period we spent a whole lot of time engaging with investors across the globe, in the Far East, in the yen market, in continental Europe, in the UK, in the Northern Americas. And during that time, Chair, I believe that I acquired a whole lot of experience that ordinarily I would not have. And I'm also privileged to have been part of that team during the 2 crises. That was the 1998 Russia crisis and the 2001 Asian crisis, which in a way taught us lessons around how to prudently manage liabilities. It was at the time that a decision was taken at the National Treasury that even though the sovereign was being managed prudently as far as liability management is concerned, but we did not have a proactive way or a dynamic way of managing risk. I was then seconded to be one of the officials to start the risk management section. And it's within that period where we developed what we called a dynamic benchmark. We had key variables that we had identified that if, for instance, volatility is at an X level, then we would know that a prudent way to manage your liabilities is to do YZ or whatever. I was then promoted to be a director of market risk. And market risk chair in this instance refers to interest rate, currency risk, commodity risk, and the like. I spent about 5.5 years at the National Treasury. I then ventured to be on my own and open my own consulting firm. And I think I spent about 4 or 5 years at that, in my own company. And again, Chair, I consider myself to be highly privileged because it's during that time that I was again given the opportunity to work on a number of various projects that were of national importance, I believe. One of them was the retail bond, and my company, together with another company, were tasked to develop and to market the retail bond, which is now one of the standing instruments. I was also privileged, Chair, to be one of the people that were tasked to review and analyze the 5 billion loss which SAA had at that particular in time. And I was also privileged, Chair, to have been asked to review all the financing structures that all of the, I think there were about 88 aircrafts of SAA, because each one of them had a different and a very specific financing financing structure. During the time of my self-employment, even though I was getting projects, I wanted to venture into more infrastructure funds, finance. And as a small company, it's not very easy to venture into such big projects. Even if you were to be successful to venture into such projects, they are by their nature very long, and you need to have a deep pocket to be able to absorb the expenses while you are waiting for a project to be closed in year 2 or year 3. I then saw through an advertisement an opportunity at Transnet for the head of structured finance, and I applied that, and I was fortunate to be appointed. I joined Transnet in 2007, and I started off as the head of structured finance. I was then later promoted to group treasurer, and I spent 7 years at the company.
And are you still employed with Transnet?
No, Chair. I had to resign at the end of 2014.
Thank you.
So you were group treasurer from 2007 to 2014, or?
No, Chair. I was the head of structured finance from November 2007 up to February 2013. From March 2013 to November 2014, I was the group treasurer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. From paragraph 6 of your statement and following, you deal with the role, structure, and capabilities of the Treasury Department in Transnet. And at 6.1 of your statement, you summarize the role of the Treasury Department. Can you take the Chair through this?
Okay, the Transnet Treasury Chair, Transnet is a very big organization, Chair. It has about 5 core divisions, 2 in the rail space, which is your Transnet Freight Rail and your Transnet Engineering. We have your Transnet Ports Authority, Transnet Port Terminals, you have your pipelines. But a decision was taken that the Treasury activities will be centralized. Even though each of the divisions had their own finance section, the Treasury activities were all centralized. So we operated in a centralized model. In a nutshell, the function of Treasury or the objective of Treasury was to ensure that the group has sufficient money to meet all its operational and capital obligations. And we needed to do that within a board-approved financial risk management framework. So we had parameters within which we operated in. And one of the key parameters that we had to make sure that we protect is what we call the cash interest cover ratio and the gearing. The cash interest cover ratio, Chair, in simple terms, is the amount of money that is available to pay interest. And so it was decided that a prudent, ordinarily you can say that a 1-to-1, it's fine, but we do know that over and above interest payments, there are other obligations that have to be met. So a ratio of at least 3 times is a comfortable ratio. So the benchmark is, and I believe continues to be, 3 times the cash interest cover ratio. And another important...
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand that. What was the term that you said?
Cash interest cover ratio.
Cash interest.
Cover ratio.
Coverage.
Cover ratio.
Oh, or ratio. And you said that refers to the amount of money that you keep aside or you identify to pay interest.
That is available, Chair, to pay interest. So
Yeah.
it will include the money that the company generates generally,
Yes,
and
yes.
any other source.
So, but what it means, does it mean that you would be having a certain amount of money that you set aside and say this is to take care of interest that we accumulate and have to pay in regard to various transactions?
I wouldn't quite say that we set it aside, but we make sure that it's available.
You identify.
We identify
you
that
say
it's available. It's always
£1
available.
billion or something.
It's the amount of money that should always be available.
That should always be available.
Yes.
But what I mean is, when you say it's an amount of money that should always be available, maybe not practically, but theoretically, that should not be used for anything else other than.
No, Chair, it's
Not
not a
like-
set aside. It's not a specific.
Yes.
No.
So-
For instance,
But if you have, let's say, you have, as Transnet, 20 billion rand in your bank account, okay? Wouldn't you say, when you say that should be available, wouldn't you say, out of that 20 billion rand, so much must be available, a minimum of so much must be always available for interest? Is that not what you're talking about?
no, Chair, this is a different context. What you are referring to is a liquidity buffer,
Yes.
which we had as 1 billion to cover our normal expenses.
Yes, yes.
So in this instance, Transnet had about 9 or 10 billion rands worth of interest to be paid annually.
Yes.
So there is no way that we could have set aside 10 billion.
Yes.
But the business is able to generate sufficient cash.
So when you say it should be available, I take that to mean it might not always be available, but that's the ideal situation.
It is available in one form or the other,
Or
Chair.
it has to be available
In one form or the other, it is available.
Yes.
Yes.
But it's not distinct.
It's not a set aside.
Yeah, it's not set aside.
Correct, Chair.
But there is no risk that it could be used for something else and suddenly you don't have it.
No, Chair, it is embedded in the process.
It's embedded in the whole
yeah,
process.
Yeah.
But it would be a certain amount. It would be a certain amount that is not aside, but you know it shouldn't be less than a certain amount or not.
It's a function of what the business is able to generate.
Okay.
So a big organization like Transnet that has a high capability of generating cash,
Yeah,
to maintain that level,
yeah,
it's easier and it gives comfort
yeah.
to investors, lenders, and rating agencies that when they lend us money, we'll be able to pay interest with ease. So it's
Okay.
just an indication that we'll be able to pay interest with ease.
Yes.
So
But does someone have to keep an eye that that ratio stays in a certain way or not really?
it is, Chair, it is Group Treasurer that is tasked.
That must keep
In
an eye
actual
on
fact, it is one of the KPIs
that. Yeah,
that are in the Treasury scorecard. So as the Group Treasurer, it will
Yes.
be in my performance contract.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You have mentioned that there were two key financial ratios, and you have just explained what the cash interest cover ratio entails. What was the second key ratio?
The second key ratio, Chair, is gearing. In simple terms, is how much you are indebted. It's the
What-
gearing ratio. So
Okay,
it's a
how do you spell that?
gearing, Gearing.
Gearing ratio.
It's a gearing ratio.
And just repeat what that represents.
It represents the level of debt that
That
an
you
organization has relative to its equity.
Okay, thank you.
And again, Chair, the more manageable your debt levels are, the better you are perceived as a credit.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Yes, and what was the threshold that Transnet sought to maintain insofar as the gearing ratio?
The official threshold was 50%, but then for prudence's sake, we had an internal mark of 47%. This would allow us to take any corrective measures before we even hit 50%.
And what were the key outputs of the Treasury Department?
Okay. I now go to paragraph 6.2, Chair, in trying to unpack the key outputs of the Treasury Department. The first one that I would like to highlight is 621, which is developing the funding strategy and plan for the group. You will know, Chair, that all state-owned entities are required to develop an annual corporate plan. And in Transnet's case, I mean, most of them will develop a 3-year corporate plan. In Transnet's case, we developed a 7-year rolling plan. It's a big bundle, Chair. It has strategies for all of our divisions. And the PEC is approved. All of the strategies for TFR, TE, TNPA, they are all approved as one in a package. But in that PEC, there is what we call the borrowing strategy or the borrowing plan. It's about a 30-page document, but it's approved separately because of its importance. It's not approved as a PEC. And it's an input that, not even an input, it's the output of the Treasury Department. It sets out how the organization will be funded over the medium term. It sets out and it identifies all the key risks that is facing the organization, and it also includes what we call as scenario analysis, because when we budget, Chair, we assume certain levels of rates over the medium term. And as we know, forecast and actuals can sometimes differ, or they mostly differ. So we'll also include a scenario of some sort and say that should X change from Y to G or G+4, then this is the impact. So it's a very detailed plan. And whilst we are still on that point, Chair, I also want to highlight that it is still the responsibility of Group Treasury, because we have a big organization, and it is important that when each and every one of those divisions budget, they budget using the same parameters. So within the Treasury Department chain, we have the capabilities of providing and checking what the economy and the market is likely to look like. So for the 7-year plan chain, even though we know today that prime is at 10.25 or JIBA at 7 point whatever, we'll then say that in the medium term, this is where today the currency as per the dollar, the euro and whatever is at X, oil is at X, but over the period, the 7-year period, the market expects it to be X plus G or whatever. So all of those were included, and each and every division, when they budgeted, they did not just budget based on what the rates are today. They budgeted to include what the forecast is expected to be in year 3 or year 4 or whatever the year might be. Because remember that the capital expenditure plan, though we have a one number at a particular point in time, the execution of that plan spans over a number of periods. So it's very important that when they budget, and they did so, Chair, that they would use even the currency, they will use what is forecasted to be in the future. So that's number one. Number two, Chair, is the management of interest rate, foreign exchange, commodity, and credit-related risks. As a net borrower, and because it was anticipated that during the period of the MDS, Transnet will continue to be a net borrower because of the intensity and the need to spend billions and billions of amounts of money for capital. So management of interest rate was key, foreign exchange and commodity. And because we have half of our fleet, the rail fleet at that time, I don't know now, it was diesel. So it was very important that we also include that. And I also want to highlight that as a state-owned entity and as a corporate in general, our role is not to speculate on where the rent will be or the commodity price will be. Our role is to protect the budget, because the 7-year plan is crafted based on certain assumptions. So our role first and foremost was to protect the budget and the integrity of the budget, because you don't want to plan X and be far off. We understand that there are variances, but they should not be too far away from what was originally intended. And then the third point is what you were referring to earlier, Chair, the cash buffer. We do know that we budget, but we know that life happens all the time. So it is important that at any particular point in time, should there be an unforeseen expense, we have a buffer. And for the size of Transnet's organization, a decision was made that 1 billion is a reasonable number to keep. And number 4 is to reduce the weighted average cost of debt. At the time when I left Transnet, I think our weighted average cost was around 10.35, 9. 9.35 to around 9.4%. And it's also important that when we look at WACT, it's a basket of all the interest rates that have been agreed for different facilities. So that one number that represented the entirety of the debt portfolio was about 9.4. So whatever financing facility that we wanted to engage with or we wanted to take up, we had to compare to where our weighted average cost of debt is. That's one. And 2, we have bonds that are trading out in the market that are listed in the JSE. And we'll also use that as a reference point, because those bonds, their yields will tell us where exactly is Transnet regarded as far as interest for a 10-year or 7-year or a 15-year. And even during that time, Chair, our bonds were trading at around 9.2% to 9.5%. So the 9.49, around 9 area was a key reference point for us. So when we go out and issue, because it was in my performance contract, Chair, that I will reduce the weighted average cost of debt. I think the number that we had was about 300 million, that relative to the amount of funds that are set aside for interest cost, we need to at least save 300 million, spend less by 300 million. And then is the managing of the relationship with banks and rating agencies and the relevant regulators. In this instance, it's your Reserve Bank, it's National Treasury, it's the listing authority, be it the JSE or the UKLA. And another important point, Chair, is the compliance and governance matters. Treasury is a highly regulated area. If I'm not wrong, Chair, I think we had about, just as that one small unit within Transnet. I know that Transnet is a group, I'm sure there are many laws and regulations that are applicable. But for us, Chair, if I'm not wrong, I think we had over 40 laws and regulations that we had to adhere to. And in addition, we have loans that we have entered into, and we have covenanted in a certain way, and we therefore needed to make sure that we don't breach any of those. So compliance and governance is one of the key things that way. And in addition, Chair, we had what we call the critical financial reporting controls. These are your controls that make sure that all of the screws, if I may put it that way, are tightened as far as the financial management of the Treasury business is concerned. I think I've covered most of page 3.
Yes, thank you. And what was the makeup of the Treasury Department when you were with Transnet?
Chair, I would like to refer you to Annexure 1.
That would be on page 36 of the bundle. And the actual document would be at page 37 of the bundle.
Thank you, Council.
What is that document at page 37?
Chair, the page 37 is the organogram of the Treasury Department as it was in 2014. We had a team of 40, 32 of which were professionals. And the organization was divided into 4. The first one is what we call front office. Front office is where our transaction banking happens. They are responsible for transaction banking. So there's a deputy treasurer. I had 4 deputies reporting to me. So the first deputy was responsible for front office. They will be responsible for cash management, credit rating management, your transaction banking, and your dealing. Dealing, Chair, is where your cross-currency swap, your money market activities happen. So I think it was about 10 of them in that department. The second department was structured finance. There were 5 professionals in that department. This is where the loans are originated, Chair. Be it your domestic loans, your global loans, be it your export credit agency loans, your just plain bank loans, or your development finance loans. This is where most of the funding, not most, all of the funding activities were executed, Chair. And
Do you say that is that the front office?
No.
Where is that?
No. Front office, it's debt management, cash management, it's dealing, it's credit rating, and is economic and market analysis. That's front office.
Okay.
Structured finance is funding.
Oh,
It's
okay, it's
long-term
under
funding.
structured finance.
It's
that's
under
where
structured
funding,
finance,
yeah.
Chair.
Okay, you said both domestic and international.
Both domestic and across all markets.
Yes, okay.
Thank you, Chair. And the third one is what we call middle office. This area was responsible for financial risk management and compliance. So they were the custodians of the financial risk management framework. They are the team that will develop and enhance your risk management framework in terms of how do we manage currency risk, how do we manage supplier risk, how do we manage all sorts of risk, Chair. And again, Chair, it was well-resourced as well and supported. All of these departments were supported by appropriate systems as well and processes.
By appropriate?
Systems.
Systems,
Okay. IT systems.
Yes.
And then we had the fourth department, which is treasury operation. This is where your complex treasury accounting rests. And this is where the financial controls and the operational risk, the middle office chair is responsible for the financial risk. And the operations the treasury operations is responsible for your complex financial accounting matters that relates to your hedges and the like. And they are also the custodian of your operational risk. So the IT systems, the ex-con matters, settlement matters, reconciliation, they all were in this department. Chair, the Treasury Department is divided in this manner so as to make sure that we don't have a player and a referee. You will see in this, under this four, that you will have your, so it's a segregation of duties, Chair, to make sure that those that take risk do not even manage it. So there was a proper segregation of duties. There was a proper delegation of authority in terms of who can do what when. And Chair, if I may
Before you continue, just so that we complete the organogram as you've provided, the 4 subunits that fell under Treasury reported to you as the Group Treasurer.
Correct, Chair.
And what was the skill set and expertise of the 40 staff members in that unit?
Thank you, Chair. As I indicated earlier on, we had 4 staff members, 32 of which were professionals. Chair, I believe that we were highly blessed with the level of skills that we had. We had a number of MBAs within our midst. We had a number of those who are CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst holders. It's an international accreditation of finance professionals. We had a number of CAs. We had mathematicians, Chair, masters in maths, masters in applied maths. We had a number of LLBs, LLMs. We had business graduates, we had economists. So, Chair, we had a mixture of highly qualified and highly experienced. And these are the 32 professionals that I'm referring to. And, Chair, not only were they highly qualified, but they were also highly experienced. Some of them had investment banking experience. Some of them had commercial law or commercial contracting experience. And most of them had relevant SOC or treasury experience or trading experience. So we had a mixed experience and qualification, but within the entire team, Chair, we complemented each other and completed what was required in terms of the skills. So we were sufficiently resourced, qualified, and highly experienced.
And on average, what was the number of years of experience of the staff members?
We had few juniors, to be honest. I think we had 2 who had just gone through what we called the graduate program. But over and above that, I think the average was about 10 to 30, 35 years of experience. So it was a solid team.
Yes. In paragraph 8 of your statement on page 4, you again refer to the 2 ratios that you mentioned earlier, being the cash interest cover ratio and the gearing ratio. What was the importance of those 2 ratios as you have set out in your paragraph 8?
Chair, the 2 ratios are important for 2 reasons. The first one is that because Transnet is a net borrower, it goes out there in the public market or sometimes in the private market to raise money. So it is important to be rated accordingly. And in this instance, Chair, we had made it as a performance measure that we want to maintain a standalone investment credit profile. I must say, Chair, that the credit profile, because the organization was so well managed, it was even above the sovereign as a standalone. I know that some SOCs or most of the SOCs, they only get investment rated once they get the sovereign kick in. We didn't need that, Chair. We were strong on our own. So, and it was because of the prudence around financial management. So that's one. And 2, when a lender does their credit due diligence, they assign certain points to certain key matrices. And it was important for us to maintain healthy matrices so that when they price us cost effectively, Chair.
Yes.
And we saw that in a number of areas, that every time we were priced, our standalone credit profile will come through pricing.
In paragraph 9 and following of your statement, you provide a broad historic context of the balance sheet status of Transnet. Without going into too much detail, can you tell the Chair what the status was during the periods mentioned there?
Chair, when I joined Transnet in 2007, it was at the time where the 4-point turnaround strategy was being finalized. You will remember that before 2007, Transnet was a big company. It had airline, it had buses, it had trucks, it has passenger rail, it has, I think it even had the housing loans. So during 2004 and 2007, all what was defined as non-core was divested. And during the period of 2003-2004, the balance sheet was in such an unhealthy state, Chair, that I believe the cash interest cover was negative, which meant that there was not enough money to pay even interest. And the gearing levels were sitting at around 83, 84%. So it was therefore important that before you can even embark on a huge capital expenditure plan, you needed to clean up your balance sheet. So when I joined in 2007, the balance sheet was cleaned up, the organization was refocused and repurposed to what we call a freight and logistic company. At that point in time, Chair, the gearing was now low at 39%, and the cash interest cover was very healthy at 7.9%. I believe, Chair, that it was at that point that the board and the executive thought that the time was right to re-energize the organization, because it was at a point, again, Chair, when there was not much done in terms of capital expenditure plan. I remember when I looked at the numbers, I think spend was around 2 billion, for maintenance and expansion, and for a monster like Transnet, that is very small. So a decision was made that Transnet needed to be beefed up, understanding that it plays a very critical role within the economy of South Africa. that it plays a critical role in the competitiveness of the economy, and importantly, it plays a critical role in the cost of doing business in South Africa, because if the logistics is not working properly and there is inefficiencies, it's very expensive to move goods from point A to point B. And for us to achieve that, Chair, it was very important that our assets are up to scratch. They are maintained appropriately, they are renewed, those that need to be renewed. And I believe, Chair, that it was at the point that a decision was made that structured finance has to be a division that forms part of Treasury to be able to support the capital expenditure plan. At that point, when I joined, the capital expenditure plan was 65 billion. It then moved the following year to 78 billion. Even at that point, Chair, it was clear that it's 78 billion just for a period of time. It was clear, at least in my mind, when the executives were discussing that the need was much more than that. So in 2010, the strategy was changed to quantum leap. Even then, Chair, it was, because I think it was around 100 billion at that point, it was still not sufficient to be able to cover all the work that is needed. You will know that Transnet owns and manages the ports, and you will also know that over a period of time, the size of vessels have grown tremendously, such that it needed, the organization needed to make sure that the ports are able to accommodate your huge vessels in terms of the keys and the whatever that is needed around the port. And additionally, you needed the right equipment to be able to lift, and do whatever. So those were the areas that were being done at the ports. And Chair, even during that time, a new port, the port of Unguja, was also executed, and I think it was fully commissioned around 2010. So on the rail side, Chair, our tracks were old. I think I'm not a technical person, Chair, so I'll just like to. Our trains, I think, were on average 25 to 30-year-old, and they were not properly maintained. So it was very important, again, Chair, to make sure that the railway infrastructure and the locomotives and wagons, Chair, are also modernized, including all the systems that are needed to run a railway. So it was at that time that I was employed, Chair, and yeah.
Yes, and you also speak of several committees that were established pursuant to matters relative to CapEx and augmenting the Treasury Department. Can you take the Chair through the committees that were established as well as their purpose?
Chair, because of the understanding that even though Transnet is a cash pumping organization, the money that the company generates will not be sufficient to pay for all the capital expenditure plan. It was therefore necessary to enhance and to beef up the Treasury team, which will be at the core of financing. The structured finance division was born. I was the first one to be employed at that time. I then capacitated it with 2 more professionals and added 2 more later. And even within the other departments, Chair, at that point, a new deputy treasurer in the operations department was employed, and another CA was employed within the treasury operations. In front office, Chair, when I joined, I was told that 1 or 2 dealers had just been appointed. After I joined, Chair, the then group treasurer also employed, and the deputy treasurer also employed the debt manager. Because, Chair, once you get to a point where you have a huge debt portfolio, you have to have resources that actively manage that. So it was important as well to enhance that department. In parallel, the processes and the governance were were also improved. Processes for structured finance, Chair, there were no funding specific processes, so we developed that from scratch. And from Treasury Operations, Chair, when Stephen Mamabulo joined, there were a number of weaknesses that were identified at that point in time. And he and his team, Chair, enhanced the Treasury environment because his area is very key and core. It's like the engine of the organization, if I may put it that way, Chair. And the risk management framework, Chair, I must say that our risk management framework is one of the best. But even at that point, Chair, we needed to make sure that we keep abreast to the latest developments in the financial risk management framework. So it was also enhanced. And in 2013, Chair, within Transnet, there are a number of...
Yes, before you carry on.
Okay.
Insofar as governance and augmenting the Treasury Department, you have made mention of having employed 2 additional staff members. Were there any committees in place or governance structures that were put in place pursuant to augmenting the Treasury Department?
Okay, thank you, Chair. The structure that was there, Chair, was what we call FINCO. FINCO is a subcommittee of EXCO. And FINCO meets once a month, and it's a committee made up of the group CFO, all the CFOs of the business unit, the group treasurer, general manager tax, group planning. Those are the ones that I can remember. And Chair, because it's a big committee, and it's focused mainly on pure accounting and pure reporting matters. We found over time that when we came to the treasury matters, the report, Chair, was not interrogated that much. And we felt the need to have a treasury-specific committee wherein the treasury specifics will be debated, guidance will be sought, opinions, will be received. Because there is no point in presenting a paper and you don't get advice from other people. So we set what we call ALCO, which is an Asset and Liability Committee, is specific to Treasury. So it became like your Treasury EXCO. The intention was over time it will be a standalone subcommittee of EXCO. But in the meantime, it was a subcommittee of FINCO. So this was one of the enhancements. And Chair, it did so well because at least for the first time, we were able to table each and every matter that is important within the Treasury environment and to thresh out each and everything and get opinion from all the other experts or the other colleagues. And in this instance, Chair, the members of the ALCO committee was the group CFO, the group treasurer, the 4 deputy treasurers, the GM responsible for tax, GM reporting, GM planning, and GM risk management, GM supply chain, Chair.
Yes, now in paragraph 17 of your statement, you set out certain measures or steps that were taken in anticipation of the increased funding requirement. Can you please take the Chair through this?
So, Chair, in anticipation of what was going to be a huge capital expenditure plan that requires a number of funding activities, it was therefore important to make sure that the group is able to source financing at all times. And by at all times, Chair, you can only be able to source funding at all times if you have sufficient diverse sources of funds across the globe. So we started off with launching the 30 billion domestic medium-term note program, the DMTN, which is listed at the JSE. This program allows us to issue bonds, different types of bonds, Chair, be it an inflation linker, a fixed rate bond, or a floating rate bond, but it allows us to issue a whole lot of and even commercial paper. So it was very keen. And later on in 2011, as the capital plan intensified, it was then upsized to 55 billion. And in addition, Chair, we also launched what we call the Global Medium-Term Note Program, which is similar to the DMTN, but this one is a global platform. It allows us to access money from all qualifying investors across the globe, be it in the Far East, continental Europe, and the Americas. This GMTN is listed with the UK listing authority. When the investment plan started, Chair, the executive at that point did a roadshow across the globe as well, because we know that we don't produce certain things in South Africa, and we therefore knew that there's going to be a whole lot of imported component. So the executives at that time and the group treasurer at that time did a roadshow across the major markets and met with the export credit agencies. And we also had a platform for ECA funding. And as part of this, Chair, we also started rebuilding relationships with banks, both domestically and internationally, as well as investors, Chair.
Yes, can we turn to page 161 of the bundle? That is annexure MM24. What is that document that appears on that page?
Okay, Chair, Annexure MM24 is what we call the Financial Risk Management Framework. This is developed by the Treasury team, and it will get presented to the different committees of EXCO and the different committees of the board that are relevant, with final approval resting with the Transnet board. This is what we call the Bible of Treasury, because it highlights and it talks about the governance issues. It highlights, it identifies all of the risks that are faced within the Transnet business, and it also instructs how each of those risks will be managed. One of the risks, Chair, that it clearly highlights is on liquidity, that for liquidity risk management, Chair, will have $1 billion just as a buffer, sitting around. For anything, for an obligation that is over 2 billion rands, we'll make sure that we have money 6 weeks in advance, and we'll also make sure that at any point in time, we have at least 8 billion of facilities that are available at 24-hour notice. It's important, Chair, to do that, because we monitor what we call the AB ratio, is the sources to uses ratio, and it has to be on a rolling 12-month basis, at least 1.2. If you have at least 1.2, you know that at any point in time in the next 12 months, the organization has sufficient resources. And it's also important for your going concern assessment. And one of the key risks that is mentioned in this, Chair, is also your market risk that relates to currency risk and commodity risk. And it also talks to your credit risk, Chair, and it will even go further and say that for you to have a counterparty, it must have a certain stature, it must have a net assets of at least 5 billion rand, it must be rated by an international accredited rating agency, and have at least an A- rated, Chair. So it's very rigorous, it's updated annually, and it even includes the list of instruments that we are allowed to use.
Yes, and if you turn to page 38 of the bundle, that being Annexure MM2. The actual document appears at page 39 of the bundle.
Page 32.
Are you there?
Page 32.
Page 39. What is the document that appears on that page?
Oh, okay. So, Annexure MM2, Chair, is the, what did we call it? Is the guidelines for supply agreement. Chair, as I indicated before, that Transnet is a very big organization, and at any point in time, there's a whole lot of procurement events happening across the organization. So it was very important to have guidelines that should be followed for all procurement. We understood that certain big procurement events, the Treasury would be involved, but for many of the smaller ones, we will not be involved. So it was important for us to enhance our processes to make sure that even though Treasury may not be physically involved, there are guidelines on the things that the division should look into. So it talks to your approved FX policing, and it relates to the fact that wherever possible, the divisions must enter into a fixed rent contract. Fixed rent, Chair, the word fixed is important because sometimes people may enter into a rent contract, but you'll find that it's linked to some index or some rate, and therefore it's no longer fixed because it's subject to a movement of some other rate. So it was important to, to make sure that we have that fix, because as I indicated before, our role is not to speculate, but to protect the budget. It will even go to a point of saying that if there is an important component of an X amount, then you need Treasury input, and there are sign-offs to be sought from your group reporting, group tax, and group treasury. And I also want to highlight that this on page 40.2.1, this part, Chair, is also included in the delegation of authority, where it says that, especially for mega projects, that where in the mega project, Chair, normally the Treasury would be involved, but then it will go on further to say that before the GCFO can sign off, he or she can only sign off after all the relevant finance departments have signed off, to make sure that all of the risk have been identified, mitigated appropriately. And Chair, if we go to 2.2, still on page 4, we even say there that, Chair,
Page 40.
still on page 40,
Yes.
Paragraph 2.2, we even say there that, because we understand that there may be a need for advance payment, but if you can negotiate enough, stay away from it. But if you have to pay an advance payment, make sure that there's a guarantee at the back of that. And it was also another innovation of Treasury, Chair, to say that when you are given a guarantee, make sure that it's not a surety, because there was a practice across the group that divisions will accept a surety. We all know that a surety, before you can exercise your rights under the surety, there are a number of steps. And ordinarily, in a supply agreement, there is a clear dispute resolution mechanism that once you get to a point where you are no longer happy, you would have followed that. And once you get to a point of saying that now I want my money back, you really don't want to be dancing around, you just want your money back. And therefore it was important to even put a word, a form, an acceptable form from a Treasury perspective, and say that this is the acceptable form. It has to be a demand guarantee, and it has to be from a suitable financial institution rated at least A-.
Yes, and there are further requirements that that guideline would prescribe, and you have summarized those from paragraph 20.1 to 20.5 of your statement.
Yes, Chair. The first one is the ZA fixed pricing, which I've highlighted now. And the second one, Chair, is that because by their nature, the assets that we buy will not be paid in one go. So it was important for us to workshop and to sensitize the divisions that when you agree to a payment schedule, you can't agree to a payment schedule that requires Transnet to pay an invoice every week, for instance, or every other day. It has to be a bankable payment schedule, like, once a month or once a quarter. And importantly as well, Chair, we find that for important components, you will find that in certain instances, an OEM will set up a subsidiary here in South Africa. And in such an instance, Chair, you also require a parent company guarantee, because this is just a small organization, and the IP and the know-how is sitting back home. So the acceptable form of the parent company guarantee, Chair, was another innovation that was done by Group Treasury, Chair, post-2007. And in 25, Chair, is the performance and warranty bonds. We understand that projects will be executed over a number of periods, and at the end of the term when that particular asset is commissioned, you also want to have a warranty that it will perform according to specification, that if there are any defects and they are not remedied appropriately, then you have recourse using either a performance or a warranty bond.
Yes, from paragraph 21, you deal with the marketing demand strategy, over which sufficient evidence has been provided. And from paragraph 22 to 24, you then deal with the funding plan and strategy.
Are you back to her statement now?
Yes, Chair, my apologies.
Okay, please always announce
My
when you
apologies,
move
Chair.
from one document to another.
My
Okay.
apologies, Chair, thank you.
What paragraph now?
At paragraph 21,
Okay.
the statement makes reference to the market demand strategy, which has been covered sufficiently by other Transnet witnesses. And from 22 to 24, you deal with the funding plan strategy, which aspect we will return to. From 25, you deal with the new topic, which is the role of Treasury in the acquisition of the 1064 locomotives, and this being during the tender stage. What role does Treasury play in tenders?
Chair, there are different stages where Treasury plays a role. In the first instance, Chair, is when a tender document is still a draft before it's even advertised. For mega projects, Chair, it will come to us for review, just to make sure that when the tenderers submit their proposal, they know that they may be expected to do certain services for us. So in this instance, Chair, we had a standard wording to make sure that when the tender goes out, it had, and that wording, Chair, is part of the supply guidelines that we have just gone through. So we will include that, and we will also make sure that it also covers the issues around the advance payment guarantees and the requirement of the bonds and the quality of the issuers of the bonds. And it will also go on further to say that by submitting the proposal, the bidder agrees to assisting us, because in an instance where we choose to use an export credit agency, there will be certain admin duties that are required, especially around the confirmation of the country of origin. because when suppliers produce an asset, sometimes they can source locally or they can use their global sourcing strategy. So it was important to have all of those out there in the open, even before a tender. It was to make sure that when we decide to finance a project anyhow, we can choose, financing through A or through G, but all of those are covered in the tender document. So that will be our role, Chair, to make sure that all of the treasury requirements are included. And we'll also say, where applicable, please also include ZAR pricing.
You said that's the role of Treasury when you're dealing with mega projects or mega tenders. What would define a project or tender as mega?
I think we used loosely 300 million.
Oh, that's like the minimum.
Correct, Chair.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Now, specific to the 1064 locomotives acquisition, what role did your unit play in the tender stage of the 1064 locomotives?
Chair, after we have given our inputs on the tender documents, the tender, after the division has satisfied itself, it will be advertised. And during that open stage, we did not have any role to play. And once the tender has closed, the division will then assemble what we call a multidisciplinary team to evaluate the tenders. And in this particular instance, the evaluation happened, I believe, between November and December, between October 2013 and December 2013. And from a treasury perspective, two officials that represented us were Danny Smith, who was the deputy treasurer responsible for middle office, and Tsietsi Tlaletsi, who was responsible for debt management in the front office. So they are the ones who formed part of the finance team and evaluated the tenders, Chair.
Chair, it is 11:15. Might this be an opportune time to take the short adjournment?
Yes, we'll take the short adjournment and we'll resume at 11:30. We adjourn. You may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Makgato, before the short adjournment, you were giving evidence on the involvement of the Treasury Department in relation to the 1064 locomotives. Now, we know that evidence has been given that General Electric, Bombardier, CSR, which is China South Rail, and CNR, which is China North Rail, were the shortlisted bidders. The next event that you give evidence of is at paragraph 30 of your statement in January 2014. What happened during that period?
Chair, normal procedure is that once the bidders have been selected, a data room will be set up. And those that are expected as per procedure to review and negotiate will then be able to go to the data room to review the documents. So me as the head of Treasury, and understanding that the procurement event is large, I needed to personally go and review the document as part of my procedure, as part of my responsibilities. Sorry about that. And I did exactly that, Chair. The data room was set up at TFR offices in Parktown. So I went there, and when I got there, I was told that the GCFO, Mr. Anuj Singh, had given instructions that I should not be allowed into the data room. That has never happened before, Chair, that I am refused entry into the data room.
And who told you that
It's
Mr.
one of
Anuj Singh, sorry, let me complete the question. Who told you that Mr. Anuj Singh said that you could not go into the data room?
Chair, it's one of the supply chain officials. I unfortunately can't remember his name. It was a he. I can't remember his name.
And did he say why Mr. Singh said you could not go into the data room?
He did not tell me the reasons.
Yes. And what was your response?
So, Chair,
But I'm sorry, but you would have asked why? Why did you say that?
I
Did
can't
you ask
even,
that?
I don't remember asking why. In turn, I just asked him a question. And I asked him, how many treasurers does this organization have? And he said 1. And I said, and who is that person? And he said, it's you, ma'am. I was like, okay, thank you. You have just answered me yourself.
He said it's?
It's me.
Yes.
I was just trying to make a statement that there is only one treasurer in the entire, Transnet employs around 60,000 people, and there's only one group treasurer. And at that point, it was me. And I didn't understand why, for such a big and risky procurement event, an instruction will be given out that I should not enter the data room.
But what was, he was Group Chief Financial Officer, that is Mr. Anuj Singh.
Correct, Chair.
In relation to Group Treasurer, would he be somebody you reported to or not? Would he be entitled to give instructions as to what you may do and what you may not do?
He was my boss, Chair. I reported to him. But my performance contract was very clear, which he signed, as well as the delegations of authority, Chair. If we refer to section 5.5.01, it talks to mega projects, and it's very clear that there is procedure to sign off contracts. And in this instance, it says that the group CFO can only sign after sign-offs from group treasury, from group legal, from group tax, from group reporting. So in as much as he was the boss, he needed to ascertain himself that group treasury has indeed reviewed and is comfortable with the contents of the document. So by going there, I was merely
Carrying out your functions?
carrying out my functions.
So which document specified this function for you?
The delegation of authority, Chair.
Delegation of authority.
Yeah, which
And-
was approved in May 2013 and effective from the 1st of June 2013. So in January 2014, that DOA was still applicable.
That delegation, would it be a delegation to you as group treasurer of a function or obligation that otherwise would have had to be performed by him or carried out by him?
It's a delegation
In other
that
words, who is the original source of the function? Is it the board? Is it the GCEO? Is it the GCFO? That's what I'm trying to establish.
Chair, ordinarily, the delegation rests with the board, right? And the board will in turn sub-delegate to the GCE, who will then in turn delegate certain activities to certain officials, depending on the areas of work.
Yes.
So this was crafted out in the DOA, that for this type of activities, this is the process. Sign-offs are required. GCF, before a supplier contract can be signed, the GCFO will sign.
Yes.
But before he does, he can only do that after
Yes.
sign-off from ABCD.
Yes, including the group
Including
treasurer.
treasury. No, it
Yeah.
didn't say treasury, it just said treasury.
Treasury.
Yes.
Okay, but obviously
As
you
the
were
head
head
of
of treasury.
Yes,
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, what then happened after you spoke to the officer who had said you couldn't go into the data room?
Chair, I ignored his statement because I just said to him that as far as I'm concerned, I am still the treasurer of the organization, and if I were to listen to what he's saying, I will not be fulfilling my responsibility. In any event, if Anoj has something to tell me, he must do so directly. So I politely told him that I will assume that I did not hear what he told me, and proceeded, Chair, and I spent the entire week at the data room.
Yes. Now, while in the data room, is there anything material that you might have picked up during your review process of the documents?
As I was reviewing stacks and stacks and stacks of files, because each bidder had many Liver Act files, which were like they were technical, operational, financial, and my review was just on the financial part because I can't review the technicalities. I then, as I was moving from one bidder to the next, I then realized some commonality or something similar in 2 or 3 of the bidders. On that day, Chair, when
So this is now after the tender had been issued and the bids had been put in?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. all right.
It's before contract negotiations. You
Okay.
go through the contract before the negotiations.
Okay.
So normal procedure would be that we go through the tender, we review the tender document, such that when you become part of the negotiating team, at least you know what you are negotiating from and what the bidders have offered. As I was reviewing, I then realized that 2 or 3 bidders, Chair, there was something similar. Similar from a BEE perspective. There's a name that appeared, one name that appeared in all or 2 or 3 of the bidders, which was a red flag to me, Chair. On that day when I saw that, I was with Gary Peter, who was then, we were both reporting to Anoj Singh, who was then the GM responsible for integrated supply chain management. I then whispered to him and said, hey, Gary, did you see that the beneficiaries are the same for this contract? And we were both surprised, I believed. And because the data room is a very quiet room, you can't be discussing. I just pointed out and we were like, hey, what can we do? And we proceeded with our work.
Just tell me more about this. So these were bids belonging to different or submitted by different entities.
Correct, Chair.
And you say 2 of the bids had something common,
2 or 3.
2 or 3.
Yes, Chair.
And what was that thing that was common?
There was a name, Chair, in the BEE
Section of the,
section
yeah.
that I saw in this bid and that bid. I was like, hey, it's like it's the same BE partners across the board. I don't know, Chair.
Is what was, did this raise in your mind the question of how could people who are competing for a bid have the same BEE personalities? Is that what was concerning you, or is it something else?
Yes, Chair, because ordinarily, each and every bidder will have a different BE party. But in this instance, Chair, I can't exactly say what it was, but it's one
caught
of
your
those
attention.
that got my attention. I was like,
It was something that you
Yes,
felt
Chair.
could be flagged to
Yeah.
investigate further.
yes, but Chair, I just discussed it with Gary, and it was not even a discussion. I was just pointing it out to him.
You just mentioned.
Yeah, and then we left it at that.
Was your impression that he shared your surprise as well?
Probably, Chair, because at that time, I was not aware that he would become, I might be shooting myself on this one, Chair, but I'm going to say it regardless.
Yes,
He would become a notice enabler.
yes.
So I was not aware at that point. I
Yes.
thought he was just
Yes.
as innocent as me.
Yes, okay, okay.
And when you say enabler, what do you mean by enabler?
Enabler in the sense that he was responsible for group supply chain. And you know that group supply chain is the custodian of all processes of supply chain. And depending on what you want to achieve, you need someone who can help you to make it right.
You mean a facilitator?
A facilitator,
Yeah.
Chair, yeah.
Yes. And what then happened after your discussion with Mr. Gary Peter in the data room?
We left it at that, Chair. As I said, I spent a week at the data room, and after my review of the documents, I then sent a nudge an email, in a way informing him that I've been to TFR. I've spent the whole week there. I think at that point, I had done about 70% of what was required to be reviewed by me. I further on said to him that, because one particular point of interest to me as a group treasurer at that point was, did their home export credit agencies or their home development finance institutions provided them with letter of support for financing? So
You're now talking about the bidders.
each of the bidders.
Each of the bidders,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
So I then realized that, yes, there is support, but whatever support that is coming from their countries of origin, it's aligned to what we have already started. Like, for instance, Bombardier has Canadian linkages. We had already started engagements with Export Development Canada long before the procurement. And Export Development Canada had already indicated, together with Investec, that they may be willing to support procurement that has a Canadian link. So we already knew that we are sorted on that front. And in particular, they had indicated support of, I think, rand equivalent of $600 million. So we were good on that. And GE, again, they had a support letter from their own export credit agency, which is US Exim. And again, Chair, it was aligned to what we have done before, and we're happy with that. The China South and China North, they were being supported by China Development Bank. And again, it was aligned to what would expect. So I was looking for something extraordinary that they might have included in their bids that we haven't thought of. So I reported back and said,
Before you tell us about the report back, you said this was of particular interest to you, what you have just told us, their respective countries and their support from certain banks, development banks in their countries. Was this a requirement which they had to meet in terms of the bids, or it was something that would be good for them to have, or what was the position?
it was not a requirement, it was just something desirable, just.
Okay. So
we wouldn't
when you
judge them
when you
based
were
on that.
looking, you wanted to see whether you could find something extra or along those lines.
Yes, Chair.
Yes, okay, thank you. I interrupted you when you were talking about reporting back to Mr. Anuj Singh, I think.
So, Chair, I reported back to him, Chair.
I think you were talking about you had gone through 70% of what you needed to go through at the data room, and you then sent him an email.
Okay, and then I sent him an email and I told him that I was comfortable with what I am seeing, specifically from the point that it confirmed that we are aligned, our thinking was aligned to what, so we had already activated certain processes within Group Treasury. But I did not mention that I was told that he did not want me to be part of or to access the data room. And he responded and said, hello, Em, I'm happy that you have gone through that. Oh, and then I also asked him because some of the bidders had included certain terms and conditions that are negotiable by their nature. So I also said, can I talk to the bidders directly just to assess certain things? And he said he advises not to, which is not a problem, Chair, because when a tender evaluation process is underway, there are strict rules in terms of who can speak to the ruler. So I didn't think it's anything untoward.
But is there a particular reason why you decided not to ask him about this instruction that you were told about?
I was just testing him, Chair, because I had already established through many of my engagements with him that he's not a man of his word. He would say, we would agree on certain things, and then when we meet, he will change just on the spot and pretend as if we have never agreed. So I was just testing him.
Okay, no, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, so in effect, in your email to him, even though you had not completed your process at did you say it's data room?
Is the data room.
The data room.
Correct.
Even though you had done 70%, in effect, your email was, I'm happy, I have no issues.
Correct, Chair.
So that he could, when the documents are put before him to sign, he would know that you don't have a problem.
It's even before the signing.
Yeah.
We're just reviewing around financing.
Yes,
so I was
okay.
just giving him comfort that whatever that a Group Treasury is doing,
Yes.
it's on the right track.
Yes.
So he should relax.
You would still come back later on when you clear everything.
Correct, Chair.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. From paragraph 38 of your statement, you deal with the contract negotiation stage. In the normal course of process, what would be Treasury's role in the contract negotiation stages of tenders?
Chair, in the normal process, Treasury will be involved in the negotiations. And I will give you a couple of examples. It was not the first time that the organization procures. It was not the first time that the organization assembled a multidisciplinary team. Already there was precedence. and there was procedure that was developed around supply agreement. We had done, I think, a 50 like news, some of the locomotives, I can't remember which batch. We had followed the same process with some of the new multi-pipeline project. So it was an embedded process, Chair, and I'm not sure if he was aware that there was a process in the organization already, but it was a process that has been there for a few years at least. So, Chair, for contract negotiation stage, I expected that I will be part of that as the group treasurer. And I had already made up my mind that I need to have Danny Smith to be part of that because he's responsible for financial risk management, so he's a very important member of the team. That Dorothy Kobe, who's the deputy treasurer responsible for structured finance, will also be part of that because this is a big financing requirement just on its own. And the third person that I thought I will also rope in, just for learning purposes, because he had requested that I should include him for learning. It was Tiesi Tlaleti, who was part of the bid adjudication team. So I was thinking that because it's a big transaction, we are going to be 4 from Treasury and do our work. And Chair, previously, the head of structured finance and the head of middle office were always part of the negotiations, and the group treasurer will sometimes join if she is not too busy. The then group treasurer chair was Ms. Disebe Mwepudi. So I expected the same process to prevail even in this instance.
So your expectation that you would be part of the negotiation team was based on established practice?
Established practice
for these big tenders?
Correct, Chair.
Yes, okay.
And based on the fact that there is only one treasury in Transnet.
Yes, and the policies and the documents to which you have referred us, did they also specify that the composition of the negotiation team should include the treasurer, or they don't say that, but the practice was there?
It's the practice, Chair.
Yes.
It includes the sign-offs. And remember that you can't sign off a document that you don't know how it came to be. So it was included in the guidelines, and it was also included in the board-approved delegation of authority.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, now in view of what you have referred to as precedent and past practice, what was the role of Treasury in the contract negotiation stage?
Chair, the role of Treasury became highly diluted, for a lack of a better word.
Talk more about that.
As I said, Chair, I expected the head of structured finance, I expected the head of middle office. I was going to lead that, Chair, because of
You were going to lead the treasury component
the
of
financing
the negotiation team.
Chair. And so I would have wanted for 4 members of the Treasury, 3 core members, and 1 just as an understudy to be part of the team. And then, Chair, as it came about, I then realized that in actual fact, my presence is not welcome. And Chair, these are some of the things that you can't really say is because someone said A, B, C, D. But it's something that you will infer as you go along. You will sense that you are not wanted, and Chair, so I attended a few of those. It was a big team, Chair. It was the technical team, the operations team, the legal team, the finance team, and within finance team, it's reporting, it's tax, it's treasury. So it was a huge team, Chair.
That is the negotiation team that
That's
you
the
talk about.
So there were different streams.
Yeah.
There were different work streams. So we met at the Weber Wenzel offices. I think we had booked a big boardroom and some of the smaller rooms for the teams to have their own private discussions to negotiate specific things. And then, Chair, I think I attended 2 or 3, but then the environment was such that it was not conducive for me.
Before you tell us about the environment at the negotiations, how you expected the composition of the Treasury team to be in a certain way in terms of established practice. Now, in terms of how it ended up being composed, that is the Treasury team that would be part of the negotiations, how did that come about? Was it Mr. Arnold Singh who simply phoned and said, you can come, or were you asked to come with your team that you chose?
Chair, I was not asked to come with the team that I chose. We all know our responsibilities within an organization, Chair.
Yes.
So I expected to be able to say that from a Treasury perspective, these are the officials that will represent. And if you remember in the guidelines, Chair, the guidelines mentions 2 officials that have to be included. It says the financial risk manager and the structured finance official. So I expected that at the bare minimum, Chair. But so I was not told explicitly that you shall not come.
Were notices simply sent to certain people to say there is a meeting that will take place at Weber Wenzel or whatever the venue was in regard to negotiations, please attend, or how did people get to know there was a meeting which they needed to attend? I think that's where I want, because based on what you said you were expecting, I thought that even though different people within Treasury may have known their roles, I expected that maybe what you had in mind is that once there was to be a meeting, you as the head of Treasury would be informed, and then you would pass on the information to the relevant people who must be part of that. So I'm wanting to find out how it came about that some went to the Weber Wenzel, and were they all the right people or not?
Okay, Chair. There were some meetings, Chair, that would happen, and I would not be invited. And I would like to refer to particular meetings that I think it was on a Sunday at Regiments offices. And in that meeting...
At what offices?
At Regiments offices in
Yes.
Houghton. And in that meeting, I am told by Danny Smith that they discussed the financial risks, they discussed the financing, they discussed the options, they discussed the structuring. All of those things I am the custodian of. So I was surprised that such a meeting would be held without anyone telling me.
But also you said it was held on a Sunday.
Yes, Chair.
Was that normal?
It was not normal, Chair, but when it's a hectic time, one would
It's
expect,
possible, yes.
yeah,
Okay.
to work long hours,
Yes,
or yeah.
and
So
weekends.
I was not worried about that. It's a
About
Sunday.
that part, yeah. Okay. So you were not invited to that?
I was not invited, Chair, and it was not the only meeting where I was not invited. I mean, Danny is a very polite man. So he would sometimes come and just give me feedback, and yeah, so that's how. So I got to realize that in actual fact, I not seeing preferred Danny, and didn't want anybody else except Danny. So that's from a Transnet perspective. In actual fact, Chair, at least in my humble opinion, Chair, the finance team was made up of members who I believe would not have the power or the ability to push back on certain matters. Because one would have expected that the finance team would be made up of people who are able to engage and to discuss constructively with Anoj. But I think in this instance, Chair, he was very strategic. I think, in my humble opinion, that he chose members that would most probably be compliant.
But the norm in terms of meetings, negotiation meetings, is it that somebody would circulate notices or invitations, and then that's how anyone would then
Correct.
attend?
Correct.
And would that be the head of the negotiation team, whoever it is that would normally do that, would issue notices to everybody that must attend?
It would normally, in the previous instances, Chair, if my memory serves me well, it would be the division who says, please come on board.
Yes. Okay. In regard to this one, do you know whether there was a standard person who was inviting people to come to meetings or issuing notices, and whether it was Mr. Singh?
Chair, in this instance, which was different from the previous procurement event, in this instance, my assessment is that Mr. Singh was in charge of the process.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you. You've earlier referred to the guideline, which we also referred to just before the short adjournment. Can I then ask you to turn to page 41 of the bundle? Page 43 of the bundle. At paragraph 2.4, is written there, agreements / letters of acceptance. Can you please take us through that paragraph?
Chair, point 2.4 of the guidelines instructs that for agreements that have an FX component of more than $3 million must be referred to group treasury, group tax, group reporting, group legal before they can be concluded. And it says again that all agreements where the rent value is more than 100 million must be referred to the same division and sign-off obtained before agreements are concluded. It says that financial risks, accounting, income tax, VAT, and funding-related issues must be considered by the relevant sections. It goes without saying that the 1064 procurement is much more than this threshold that are written here, and would therefore fall under the ambit of this process.
Yes. You earlier also referred to a meeting that was held at the regiment's offices. Did you know what the role regiments had in the contract tender negotiation stage?
Ms. Molefe, I interrupted your questioning at some stage earlier when I think you had asked a question that required her to talk about that the first meeting that she attended and she felt that she was not wanted. I'm just reminding you in case you want to pursue that first before going to this one, but I leave it to you. before pursuing the Sunday meeting one.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mathane has covered it in additional questions raised by the Chair.
Oh, then I'm not sure that I heard it. Please just go over that again. You were to attend a meeting of negotiations at Weber Wenzel, and you were saying something that's as far as I heard. Then I interrupted you.
Okay, Chair. I think I was trying to highlight the environment for me and what I sensed. Chair, when you are wanted and when you are not wanted, the environment and the feeling are not the same. So, in as much as I attended a few meetings at Weber's, I sensed that Anoj was in charge, which is okay because he's the group CFO, right? He should be in charge, probably. I don't know what was the agreement at EXCO level. And I also realized that, I saw Eric Good, who was around there. Eric
I'm
Good,
sorry, you saw?
Eric Wood, the director of,
Yes.
who was the director of regiments at that point.
Oh, Eric Wood.
Eric
yes.
Wood,
Yeah.
yes. So we proceeded with our negotiations. In actual fact, at that point in time, we were still collating. You know, when you start with the negotiations, you'll have your points that, you'll have your mini meetings where we say that we are going to consider A, B, C, D, and this will be the approach. We can tolerate G, we can't tolerate, and this will be the middle ground.
The
if we are
bottom
cornered.
line and so
Yeah,
on.
so it's like a negotiation strategy. So we are still at that level.
Oh, so this was a meeting of your Transnet negotiation team alone. It was not a meeting where you were negotiating, Transnet was negotiating with one of the bidders or with them. It was simply your own meeting where you would discuss how you are going to go about the negotiations.
The bidders were there, Chair, but then it was the initial stages where we are just
Finding out.
finding each other.
Okay.
And I believe that some of the, and I think GE as an example was going to fly their team members, I think, in the next following days or so. But we were just picking up certain points of importance that will need to be threshed out. And therefore, it was necessary for the respective work streams to each go to their own rooms and say, these are the issues that are coming out. And remember that some of these points are points that we would have gathered as we reviewed the documents in the data room. So we will highlight all of those points and we'll say, this is what we are going. This is negotiable, this is not. Maybe we, for those that are negotiable, we can maybe come to a certain point of G or X or whatever. So it was those preliminary discussions.
Oh, so basically, the negotiation team of Transnet was meeting with the bidders.
Correct, Chair.
The purpose being just to have an idea where problematic areas might be and what issues might not be a problem and so on, so that then different work streams within the Transnet negotiating team could focus on those issues that relate to their work stream and see how they will deal with certain issues, those that might be not negotiable from their point of view and those that might be managed and depending on what will happen, just identify those.
Correct, Chair.
Okay, now I understand. But you say that during that meeting, during that session, you sensed that you were not welcome.
Correct, Chair.
And you sensed this from how Mr. Anoj Singh was conducting himself, even though you can't say he did A, B, C, D, or he said A, B, C, D, but you could just sense that he wasn't happy with your presence.
Correct, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
And just adding on to that, do you know why Mr. Singh may have preferred to have Mr. Donnie Smith present in those meetings as opposed to yourself?
Chair, my impression is that he didn't want to be challenged on certain decisions. And he knew that I don't take certain things as gospel truth. When necessary, I unpack, I analyze, and I challenge if necessary. And I don't think he wanted any challenges from me. I think he deliberately chose people who are more meek, if I may put it that way, because there were a few levels below him. And Chair, this has nothing to do with age, but in a corporate structure, when people are like a few levels below you, in most cases, they are not able to forcefully challenge you,
Yes.
even if they have opinions,
Yeah.
but they can't
Yes.
force
Yes.
themselves,
Yes.
they can't put their case properly.
Ordinarily, I would have imagined that in such a setup, in such a meeting, you being group treasurer and him, that is Mr. Anuj Singh, being group chief financial officer, that one would have expected that you would be like his deputy, if you like. You were the most senior person at Treasury after him. Is that not so?
Correct, Chair, and that's what I expected. I thought that I would be the advisor on
Yes.
those matters.
Yes.
And Chair, it became clear to me that he prefers advice from Eric Wood.
Yes. But now when you say it became clear to you that he preferred Mr. Eric Wood's advice, are you suggesting that Mr. Eric would also be present at meetings that were supposed to be attended to by just the Transnet negotiation team to talk alone?
Chair, as I've indicated that I ended up not being part of the negotiating
Yes.
team, so I'm not sure if he attended, but the
Yes.
few times that I attended, he was hovering around. And I must also say that the few times that I have attended, immediately after the meetings at Weber Vansel, the team will then congregate at the regiment's offices for a wrap-up session.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mathane, can we please turn to bundle BB
Or
10?
maybe I could just ask this. So the meetings that you attended of the negotiation team before you decided not to take part because you felt unwelcome, how many of them were there?
I can't remember, Chair, but maybe
Two or
three.
three?
Maybe three. Because, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can we please turn to bundle BB10B, which contains your supplementary documents? At page 2 of your supplementary statement, if you can go to page 2 of the bundle. At paragraph 6 of your statement, you seek to make an amendment to your paragraph 43 in your main statement. Can you please take the chair through that amendment?
It is important to note that Regiments Capital, it is changing to, it is important to note that Regiments Capital replaced Nedbank in the McKinsey Consortium.
And that paragraph would be the first sentence in your paragraph 43. Can we then turn to annexure MM4 of the bundle, bundle BB10A?
Exhibit BB
Exhibit, thank you, Chair.
10A. So what page is that?
That would be at page 62.
Okay.
Are you there, ma'am?
Page 62, yes.
Yes.
Chair.
Now, in line with your correction, would that be the replacement of the letters reflecting the replacement of regiments in relation to Nedbank?
Chair, it seems that this was not there, because the replacement that I'm referring to is the replacement wherein regiments replaced Nedbank. So in this instance, Nedbank is still a member of the consortium.
Yes. And in paragraph 43 of your statement, you speak of your discussion with Mr. Anoj Singh. Can you please take the chair through that discussion?
Chair, apparently, there was a tender process that happened sometime in 2012, wherein a confined tender went, or was it a public tender or a confined tender, I don't know, for the provision of advisory services. And Chair, at that point in time, I was still the head of structured finance, but I don't remember my previous boss, Ms. Disebo Mwepud, who was the treasurer then, mentioning this. I only became aware of this when she was no longer part of the treasury team. So in this LOI dated 30 November 2012, Transnet is providing the McKinsey Consortium the letter of interest for a number of services. That includes the TFR, GFB. GFB is General Freight Business. It includes, so this is for the acquisition of 1064. It includes procurement and legal, it includes technical operation, and one important part from my perspective, Chair, it included financial, and under financial, it says developing finance and
I'm sorry. Are you looking at
page 66.
66? Okay.
Sorry, Chair, for not referencing properly.
Thank you.
It includes developing finance and funding options, and it also includes, as a point of the terms of reference, develop deal structure, and in brackets, financing, hedging, and de-risking options. So this was signed on the 4th of December 2012. Chair, now we are in 2014. Around 2013, I became aware that there's a consortium of McKinsey, but I was not aware that there are certain expectations that they will perform in terms of treasury, because one would have assumed that if there are any activities that falls within your responsibility, at least you would have been told. And since this related to funding and financing option, this falls within the structured finance. And my assumption is that the previous treasurer would have briefed me, as the head of structured finance. And I don't remember that happening. So I assume that she was not aware of this. So, Chair, I am mentioning this part because I was not aware that regiments was contracted, and I therefore questioned why regiments was part of that. And I was then told by Anoj that regiments replaced
Mr. Anoj
Nedbank.
Singh, Mr.
Sorry, Chair. Mr. Singh that regiments replaced Nedbank in the consortium. And Mr. Singh went on to say that they realized that by Nedbank being part of the consortium, there was a conflict of interest. I'm not sure, Chair, at what point did they realize that conflict of interest? Because I assume that when they whoever evaluated that bid, my assumption is that, processes to establish, conflict of interest are an embedded process of the SCM. So my assumption is that if there was any conflict of interest, it should have been raised then. But I understand that he raised it with Mackenzie, and my understanding again is that there was a discussion between Mackenzie and Nedbank, and there was an agreement that Nedbank would indeed be replaced by regiments. And all of this, Chair, is information that I received from Mr. Singh. So later on, it came to my attention that indeed regiments had replaced Nedbank and partners. So my assumption can only be that Nedbank accepted to cede its rights under the contract.
When you sought clarity from Mr. Singh as to the involvement of regiments, did you ever do that in writing?
Yes, Chair, I did. And I would like to refer to paragraph 46, I believe. Is that it?
Yes. Can you also then turn to page 73 of Exhibit BB10A? That is the bundle that is before you. It is contained under Annexure MM5.
Page 76.
Page 73.
Okay.
What document appears on that page?
It's an email that I sent to Anoj on January 31st after having spent a week at the data room.
January 31st of which year?
2014.
And what are you saying to Mr. Anoj in that email?
The first part of the
Mr.
email,
Singh, you say Mr.
Mr.
Anoj.
Singh, pardon me, Chair.
the first
Mr.
part
Singh.
of my message to Mr. Singh is around the work that I had done in the data room. And the second part is around our engagement with regiment. Chair, I would like to point out that I am asking him this question, and I'm saying here in point 2, our engagement with regiments. I'm not sure how to engage with regiments on this project, given the fact that you mentioned during our 15 January call that I should not worry about the terms of reference as they are not relevant, and I should not link the deliverables to the budget. I understand your point that they are your advisors and not mine, and they are merely advising you through me, but without a clear understanding of how our relationship with regiment is governed and how expected deliverables are supposed to be managed and measured against the terms of reference, timelines, and budget. This makes my job extremely difficult. I will appreciate clarity on their mandate so that we can proceed smoothly. He then responded to my email on the 3rd of February 2014. He said,
And just to confirm, that response still appears on the same page, page 73.
Correct, Chair.
Yes, carry on.
And then he responds and say, thanks for the note. Also good to see that there are good options for us to consider. please don't contact any suppliers at this stage. And also, let's discuss the above plus regiments issues when we next meet.
And did you ever discuss these issues with Mr. Singh?
The issues, Chair, if I may just go a little bit back. Around the 9th of January 2014, I received a proposal from regiments wherein they were proposing to act as our advisors for the procurement for the financing of the procurement of the 1064 locomotives. Their proposal was very vague, and I was not sure what their value add is. So I requested them to revise their proposal so that it can be clear to me what their proposed value add is. And I then reported back to Mr. Anuj Singh. And I did that through a call. And on the call, he was not very happy with the fact that I have asked regiments to revise their proposal. He just said that he doesn't understand why am I worried about the vagueness of the terms of reference. And in actual fact, they are not my advisors, they are his. They are merely advising him through me. So I must just make sure that I work with them. They are advising him through me. So this email, Chair, was seeking
I'm sorry,
clarity.
but how are you going to play that role if they tell you something you don't understand?
Exactly my point, Chair, hence the email. Hence the email. I was just trying to seek clarity because indeed they did revise, and I was not sure really what their value add is. So afterwards, Chair, you were asking me if we had discussions. Afterwards, we had a number of engagements, Chair, and in actual fact, it was becoming more of the norm that me and Mr. Singh would argue all the time around regiments, what they are doing, what they are not supposed to be doing. And I suppose because I was not party to the appointments and the terms of reference, so I was always clueless. I would just see them there and I didn't know really what were they doing, because as far as I was concerned, as I've highlighted before, we had a team of professionals, Chair, 32 of them.
So your arguments with Mr. Singh around regiments was really based on the fact that you didn't understand what their role was, and you didn't understand what their need, why it was necessary to have them around, and you were seeking clarity, and you expected things to be done in a certain way.
Correct, Chair.
But their presence was part of what you regarded as things not being done in the right way.
Correct, Chair.
And this is what the two of you were arguing about.
Correct, Chair.
Yes, were you kind of having different expectations? You were expecting things to be done in a certain way, but you didn't see what your problem was.
Correct, Chair. He didn't understand
Yes.
my point.
Yes.
And in actual fact, he thought that I think me and my team were clever. Whereas there are people out there who know things, who are more experienced, which is true, Chair. There's always someone or some team which is much more experienced. But at least there has to be value.
Thank you. Ms. Molefe.
Thank you, Chair. At paragraph 49 of your statement, you then deal with further events that took place relative to the negotiation stage. Can you please take the Chair through these events?
Chair, you will remember that I had sensed that I am not wanted, but I did not have evidence. But I could just see that I was being overlooked or bypassed on matters that required my input and my sign-off. And Chair, for treasure-related matters, the DOA is very specific. Certain things can only be done at the recommendation of the group treasurer, and at that time, I was the group treasurer. So I kept on being surprised over and over, and in this one instance, I believe it was the second half of 2014, I was then provided a copy of Anoj's diary.
Mr. Singh's diary. We are in formal proceedings. I know that
sorry,
because you
apologies,
worked
Chair.
with him,
I'm
you know,
sorry,
you
Chair.
used to call him Anoj, but we are in formal proceedings.
I'm
so
sorry, Chair.
we have to try and say Mr. Singh, Miss so-and-so, Miss so-and-so. Yeah, okay.
Noted, Chair, I'm sorry. I then got hold of Mr. Singh's copy of his diary. I believe it was the 13th of August 2013. He had a few meetings, Chair, and one important meeting for Treasury was his scheduled meeting with Goldman Sachs.
Ms.
And-
Mathane, sorry to interrupt. Can I refer you then to page 78 of the bundle?
Let's exhibit
BB 10A, Chair.
page 78.
Page 78, which is under MM7. Are you there, ma'am?
Yes,
You mentioned
Yes, ma'am.
that you got a hold of Mr. Singh's diary, and the year that you mentioned is 2013,
2014.
2014. Thank you. This document at page 78, what document is that?
Chair, this is a diary of Mr. Anoj. It records the meetings that he was supposed.
I guess you mean it's a page from his diary.
It's an electronic diary, Chair.
Oh, okay, okay.
It's a printout from
It's
his.
a printout
yeah,
from
it's a
his
printout.
electronic diary, okay.
Chair, it records the meeting that Mr. Singh was supposed to have on that day. You will see that at 8 o'clock, he wanted to meet with Mahomedi around the NMPP or Mohammed,
I'm
Just to-
sorry.
to-
or Mr. Mohammed.
We are dealing with the 13th of August 2014. It was a Wednesday, yeah?
It was a Wednesday, Chair.
Yes.
So the first note is the NMPP.
Would that be the handwritten note on the right side of that page?
Correct, Advocate?
And under that would be, the heading notes is provided there.
Correct, Chair.
Yes, you were explaining what is written there.
So, Chair, for 8 o'clock, this is his handwriting. He is suggesting that he wants to discuss the NMPP, and I think that he's also suggesting that he wants to see Mr. Mohammed, and I can't read the next word.
Looks like MOC to me, but it might not.
MEC or something, I don't know, Chair.
And
For
what
9
would be NNPP? What would that represent?
New multi-pipeline project.
New?
Multi-pipeline project. It's one of
Or
Transnet's
new?
big
Or
projects.
NMPP?
NMPP, Chair.
Okay, all right.
And the second point for 9 o'clock, I can't see. And between 10 o'clock and 10:30, I can see that he wanted to see me. So he has written there under notes my name.
Is the one at 9 o'clock, does it
9
look like
o'clock,
SBU
Mathane.
or something? Or CPU? Or
Chair, I can't
you
read
can't
this.
tell, okay,
Yeah.
but the next one at 10 o'clock is your one.
The 10 o'clock to 10:30, it's me, so I assumed that I was going to see him before his meeting with Mr. Molefe at 10:30 to 11:30. And the important one, Chair, is the 11:30 to 12 to 1 o'clock meeting, which is a meeting scheduled for Transnet and Goldman Sachs to discuss Exim-wrapped hybrid issuance. Now, Chair, he writes here no treasury to attend. And he,
Oh, you mean on the right-hand column where it's written by hand?
yes, Chair,
So that is no treasury
To attend. And then
Okay.
he suggests that Mr. Gary Peter, who was the GM responsible for supply chain, to attend, Mr. Vikash Sage, who was the partner of McKinsey, Mr. Eric Wood, who was the director at Regiments. He then, Chair, in my opinion here, he replaces the treasury team with Mr. Peter, Mr. Saga, and Mr. Wood. So, Chair, all along, I was just sensing that treasury is being sidelined. Things would happen that falls within the ambit of treasury. And Chair, for one reason or the other, we will not be involved. And here I have, on that day, Chair, when I received this, it was like, okay, so this is what has been happening. This has been a deliberate plan all along.
So you viewed this as confirmation of what you had sensed,
Correct, Chair.
of you not being wanted.
Correct, Chair.
And now it was like maybe not just you, but nobody from Treasury.
Correct, Chair.
But maybe, for what it's worth, where you read what he wrote as saying no Treasury, it seems no, and then an exclamation mark,
Exclamation.
and then Treasury to attend. But you understand it to say no Treasury to attend.
Correct, Chair.
Yes. And then in regard to the three names which are written by hand that you mentioned, it looks like there seems there's a question mark against each of those three names. There's what appears to be Gary, and then question mark Vikash, question mark Eric, question mark. Is that right?
Correct, Chair.
Yes, but you could identify all of those people, and you say they were not people from Treasury.
Correct, Chair.
And you say the error there suggests that they were to attend that same meeting where it is said no Treasury to attend.
Correct, Chair.
Okay.
And do you recall whether you were ever invited to this meeting?
I don't recall, Chair.
Who provided you with a copy of this diary?
It's a colleague.
And
Was that at the time or
At
after?
the time,
At
Chair.
the
At the time,
Oh,
Chair. It's a
okay.
colleague at the time.
Okay, thank you.
on the same document on page 7 at the bottom right corner, what does the date and time signify?
It says the 2014-08-12. So it's printed on the 12th of August 2014 at 2:48 p.m.
I'm sorry, have you moved from page 78?
No, Chair, we are still on page 78 at the bottom right corner of the diary.
Oh,
Ms.
okay.
Mathane was
Yes,
giving
okay.
evidence as to what the date and time signify.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chair.
So you just wanted her to confirm that the date that
Indeed
appears
so,
there.
Chair.
Okay.
And on the left side corner of that document, what appears there? Still on 78.
On the left-hand corner, it's the GCFO's name, Mr. Anoj Singh, and it says Corporate Johannesburg. Corporate is the head office, Chair.
Okay.
Yes. Now, from paragraph 52 to 54 of your statement, you speak of events that took place between January and February 2014. What happened during this period?
I'm sorry, before that, before we move away from page 78, do you have an understanding as to for whose benefit these notes were made here. In other words, as you understand, it was just notes that Mr. Singh may have made just for himself, or was the position that maybe somebody would be given this, and that person, it was important for that person to know that no treasury should be invited to the particular meeting?
Chair, I believe it was instructions for his office or notes for his office to activate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. From paragraph 52 to 54 of your statement, you deal with events that took place in January to February 2014. What happened during this period?
Chair, you will recall that in January 2014, that's the time when the planning around the negotiations started. And therefore, it was the time for negotiating with the preferred bidders. And for a contract of this nature, market practice is that we are expected to pay an advance payment. So we were working on the assumption that we will need to make available funds for deposit 4.2 billion rands for the 1064, plus an additional 600 million for the 100 plus 60. We now know that at that point in time, Chair, the 1064 actually became 1224, because it was the 1064 plus the 60 GE and 100 CSR locomotives. And the total estimated contract at that point in time was 48 billion. We were therefore working on the assumption that we need to make available 4.8 billion for a deposit for all the locomotives. Chair, we have attached Annexure MM8.
Before we go to Annexure MM8, can we please go to Exhibit BB10B, which is your supplementary statement bundle? And can you turn to page 2 of your statement? At paragraph 7 appears another amendment you seek to make, particularly at 7.1. Can you please speak to 7.1?
Thank you, Chair. On paragraph 52, the second line, there is a number there that the deposit required for the 4 contracts is projected to be around 48 billion. We would like to amend that the 48 billion refers to the total estimated contract at that point in time, and the deposit, the correct number is 4.8.
Thank you. And at paragraph 52, where you make reference to deposit, are we to understand this to be advance payments
Correct.
payable by Transnet?
Correct, Chair.
You were then referring the Chair to Annexure MM8, and that would be at page 80 of Exhibit BB10A.
Correct, Chair. Chair, this is a summary of the expected total cost of the 1224 locomotives, the expected deposit, and again, I received this note from Mr. Anuj Singh. As you can see at the top there, there's my name, Mathane, and my colleague, Selo. Selo was the GM responsible for reporting. And in this PowerPoint presentation, Mr. Singh has made a number of notes. The first one is next to the post mitigation at the far right. He has written cash flow confirm. So meaning that I need to confirm that the cash flows are available or they are being factored into the cash flow planning. And the second one, under budget FY14, he has written notes there to say that impact on AB ratio. I would have highlighted earlier on that we closely monitored our liquidity situation, and we had what you call the AB ratio, which is a sources to uses ratio, and at any point in time for a rolling 12-month, we must achieve at least a 1.2 times. So here he was merely suggesting that we must run the impact of these cash flows on the AB ratio. And the third point is the accounting opinion, CAPEX and regulation. And this is matters that will be in the domain of Ms. Sello Tsokudu. So hence I have written ST there in green, that's my handwriting, Chair, in green, and the 2 up there is MM, that's for me.
And at the bottom right corner, just next to the word page 3, there appears a date there. What is that date and what does it signify?
Chair, this is signed by by Mr. Singh, so it's his signature and it's dated the 20th of February 2014. So on the 20th of February 2014, the 1064 locomotives were estimated to be 41.9 billion rands. And we,
pardon me, what was the estimated advance payments payable by Transnet?
the estimated advance payment was 4.2 billion. And for the entire 1224, it was 4.8 billion rands.
Was it 4.2 billion?
4.2 billion rands for the 1064. But if we add the additional 100 and the additional 60, the 4.2 increases to 4.8 billion rands.
Is that information still at page 80?
Correct, Chair?
The 4.2 you're talking about, is that the one on the third column from the left alongside 1064 locomotives?
Correct, Chair.
Because at the top there, under that column, it says rand millions.
Yes, Chair. The 4,200, you will add 6 zeros, and it will be billions.
Yeah, but doesn't that that heading mislead? A person who reads, and you must remember, I'm not a finance person and I'm not a figures person, a numbers person. I thought if you have got rand millions there at the top, as you have there, I thought any figure that says 4,200, I would say 4,200 million because of the millions at on the heading. Is it not misleading?
No, Chair, it's correct. If it was billion, it will say billion on top, and it will only be 4.2 without the other 2 zeros. So now in this instance, when it says rand millions, it says add 3 zeros at the end.
Oh, that's something that only finance people will know. So, but that's how I should read it.
Correct, Chair.
With all the numbers that I see here.
Yes, Chair. If it's written millions, you add 6 zeros. You must write 6 zeros, and then you get the correct number.
Ms. Milefe, you didn't get confused. I'm the only one who got confused.
No, Chair, I managed to follow.
You know these things.
Well, from, I suppose, the benefit of consultation. However, if we can take it item by item, perhaps it might become clearer to the Chair.
Sorry?
Perhaps if we take it item by item, it
Yeah.
might become clearer to the Chair.
Okay, no, that's all right. But I think I'll make a note for myself because I might forget the rule that the witness is telling me.
Thank you,
Okay,
Chair.
so
Ms. Mathane, still on page 80. On the far right of the document, is the heading entitled Description. Is that correct? On the left, pardon me.
I'm sorry, I'm just making a note for myself. You said one must add 3 zeros.
6.
6 zeros.
It's millions.
So now the way
So
it says,
230, Chair, you write 6 zeros. So you can write 6 zeros and you will see now it's 230 million.
oh, okay, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mathane, on page 80, at the left side of that page, the first heading that appears in the first column is Description. Is that correct?
Correct, Chair?
And immediately thereafter appears latest estimate pre-mitigation, and what follows is mitigation, correct?
Correct.
Then there is a breakdown of, firstly, the estimated total cost, and as you move further towards the right, the 10% deposits. Is that correct?
Correct.
And for the first class of locomotives is the 60 class 43 locomotives. Is that correct?
Correct, Chair?
And the estimated total cost is just over 2.3 billion.
Correct, Chair?
And the anticipated deposit or advance payment is 2.3 billion. 230 million.
Correct, Chair?
Pardon me, I'm having the same issues the chair had. And after the 60 class locomotives is the 100 class locomotives, correct?
Correct, Chair?
That ETC is, to avoid making mistakes, the amount there is 3871. What does it translate to?
3.8 billion.
And the deposit?
387 million, which is
Immediate-
a 10%.
Yes. And
Okay, let me just say something, and maybe you have just said this that may help me. They, under 3871, is another way of saying it, that is 3,871 million, and that translates to 3, whatever billion.
3871. Or
Million.
another way, Chair, would just have been to round off and just say 3.8 billion, which is simpler.
No, I understand that, but I thought 3,871 billion might also be 3,871 million.
Or even with this number, Chair, you still add 6 zeros.
Yes, yes, okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And lastly, on that page.
Getting a lot of crash courses from witnesses. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Immediately below that is the 1064 locomotives, and the ETC there is written as 41,969. And what does that translate to?
It's 40, we can round it off and say 42 billion, Chair.
And the 10% deposit,
It's 4.2 billion rands.
and the total of the three classes of the locomotives under the estimated total costs would be 48 billion.
The total cost, correct, Chair?
And the total cost of the deposit,
Go away soon. Let's just give the technicians a few minutes to see if they can stop it. Okay, I think we are 5 minutes away from taking the lunch break. We should rather take the lunch break, and hopefully it will be sorted out.
as it pleases you, Chair.
Yes. We'll take the lunch adjournment. Oh, it doesn't want us to take the lunch. So, do you want to use the next few minutes?
As it pleases you, Chair,
Okay.
we may proceed. Ms. Mathane, you were also just going to clarify that the total 10% deposit or advance payments would be 4.8 billion. Is that correct?
Correct, Chair.
Now, was this amount of the 4.8 billion reflected in any documents in Transnet's preparation or budgeting for same?
Yes, Chair. In anticipation of the deposit required, we included the 4.8 billion in our cash planning cycle as reflected in Annexure MM9.
And MM9 would appear at page 82 of the bundle. Is that the document to which you refer?
Correct, Chair.
And where,
Did
what?
you say 82?
82, Chair.
Okay.
Correct, Chair. And Annexure MM9 is the cash forecast for asset the 18th of February 2014. And you can see in row that starts with 24 of March to 31 March. There's a big lump sum there under CAPEX.
So if I'm following, this would be under the what appears to be the financial year 13-14, and underneath, that would be the first column on the left side of that table.
Yes, Chair. And column number 5 is what is written CAPEX,
Yes,
and there's a big outlay there of capital,
And-
5.2.
5.2 what?
5.2 billion, Chair.
Yeah.
Chair, this is important for us to do so that we can see, I mean, some of the cash flows, though they were minor, happened the first week of April, or they were scheduled to happen the first week of April, hence the 303 CAPEX outlay during the first week of April up to the 6th of April. So, Chair, once we have done these numbers, you will see that before the the big outlay of 5.3 billion rands, the last week of March, we were all green or black. We were black. And after that, then our cash becomes red. So once we have identified that in actual fact, we are now moving into the red, at the bottom of the page, we have a number of possibilities that will turn this red again into black. So we play around with numbers on a continuous basis to make sure that when the time comes for a big outlay, it does not inconvenience us in any form or shape.
Yes. Now, in paragraph 54 of your statement, you speak to events that took place in March 2014 relative to the advance payments. Please take the chair through this.
So, Chair, up to
That's paragraph 54 of her statement.
Yes, Chair. My apologies. We're back at the statement.
So, Chair, up to the end of February,
Well, do you want her to start? I see we are at 1 already.
Well, I suppose
Maybe
we're in.
let's continue after lunch.
Thank you, Chair.
It's 1 o'clock, we'll take the lunch adjournment and we'll resume at 2 o'clock. We adjourn.